Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Korman Productions, here to do another rewatch video of Quantum Leap, Season 1, Episode 7, Camikazi Kid. I've been saying for a few videos now that I've been really looking forward to doing this episode. I was debating whether to do this episode or continue with my usual pattern of doing a This Is Us video the week after doing a Quantum Leap one. But recent events led me to the conclusion that I wanted to do this episode first, and I'll get into that a little bit later. The episode's description reads as follows. Sam leaps into the body of a gawky teenager to keep the boy's older sister from marrying an abusive alcoholic. Taking advice from Al, Sam hopes to reveal the young man's true nature by challenging him to a drag race. The episode takes place on June 6th, 1961. The episode's original air date was May 10th, 1989. The episode was directed by Alan J. Levi, who went on to direct 6 more episodes of the series. And Donald Bazzario must have really liked him, because he also did 22 episodes of his series Jag. Before going any further, I will tell you a couple of things. 1. This is not a spoiler-free video. So if you haven't yet watched this episode, please go and check it out before watching my video. Secondly, if you like this channel and want to support the channel, please like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. Now, as I've mentioned, this is my favorite episode of the season. I love the acting, the energy, the way that the show captures this period in history. And I absolutely adore the solution to this episode's problem, which is actually spoiled in the Internet Movie Database's description of the episode. Sam leaps in and finds himself in the middle of a drag race. I was actually rather surprised that Sam didn't immediately crash his car, which is what I would have done in the same situation. Sam almost crashes into a wall and ends up losing the race, which is then that he realizes that he's smoking a cigarette, which causes him to cough and toss it out the window. He looks into the mirror and notices that he's a pimply-faced young kid. And for the first time in quite some time, Sam utters his catchphrase, "Oh boy!" We cut to a 1960s style diner, which is one of those diners where you could drive up and get your food delivered directly to your car. Kind of like Sonic in the modern era. Through his narration, we learn that Sam has leapt into 17-year-old Cam. While parked in the Mambo Mobile, which is what his car will affectionately or unaffectionately be nicknamed throughout the rest of the episode, Sam finds himself getting hit by French fries, which are thrown by a group of kids known as the Impalas, some type of gang. At least that's how they're credited at the Internet Movie Database. In fact, I think they are referenced as the Impalas as the episode goes on. The head of this group, or at least the head of this group of friends, because later we'll meet the real head, is played by Jason Priestley of 90210 fame. Scott Bakula, in interviews, said that when he did some scenes with Jason Priestley, he went home to his wife and told her that Jason was going to be a star. And he wasn't wrong about that. He's known in this episode as Pencil, though he doesn't get referenced by that name at any point that I can recall during the course of this episode. The only reason I know that is, once again, thanks to Internet Movie Database. One of the trio of friends was one of the ones that was just racing, and he mentions that it's too bad they weren't racing for pinks, because he could easily have wiped off the Mambo Mobile, the eyesore, from the face of the earth. We hear a car horn in the background, which sounds a little bit like a clown horn. It turns out to be Bob and Cheryl. Bob, played by Kevin Spiritas, who is actually pretty bad in this episode. He plays the villain of sorts in this one, and he's not very good. He's not so bad, or even that important in this episode, that he sinks it, but it's definitely noticeable. And that's likely why he found a home on the daytime soap Days of Our Lives, in which he starred in 409 episodes as Dr. Craig Wesley. Cheryl, who it turns out is Sam's sister, is played by Rami Windsor, and she is the reason why I ultimately decided to do this episode now rather than waiting, because unfortunately she passed away very, very recently. She died on May 19th of this year, and that was literally just a little over a month ago at the age of 57, and that is just way, way too young. I was more than a little bummed when I heard the news. She hadn't appeared in anything since 2011, so she had clearly given up acting, but it is tragic news nonetheless. And she is rather fantastic in this episode. While Bob's friends converge in the car, Cheryl tries to get Sam's attention. Sam wanders over, and Cheryl reveals that she has exciting news, that they're joining the Peace Corps and going to Tonga. She begs Sam not to tell their parents. And then we have this really weird cut where the friends are starting to harass a 14-year-old girl, or I think she's about 14, 15, named Jill. They're holding on to her bag and playing keep away. Sam ends up ending the game, and Jill ends up running off upset. Cheryl, who is not too happy with the boys, goes after her, while the friends converge on Sam in a very menacing manner. Uh-oh, this does not seem to be good news for Sam Beckett. We cut to Jill being comforted by Cheryl, and Jill is played by Holly Fields, who has seemed to make a recent career out of playing video game characters. Cheryl tells Jill that the boys are just jealous. They're just projecting their unconscious fears onto Jill. And, alright, if you say so, Cheryl, I'll take your word for it. During the course of this conversation, it is revealed that Jill has a crush on her little brother Cam, and Cheryl is all sorts of excited. Jill begs Cheryl not to tell, but it doesn't seem like Cheryl is all that interested in committing to that promise. In fact, she says, well, maybe just a hint. She's interrupted by Bob, and we actually get a very early hint that not is all well with Bob. We get a hint at his darker nature, just like we saw his alcoholic nature when he was holding one alcoholic beverage while then drinking out of a flask, which is something I may have neglected to mention. We cut back to Sam Beckett, who is in the process of being pantsed, while Bob laughs in the background, which is when Jason Priestley's character discovers something interesting, that Sam Beckett is not wearing any underwear. So, they completely strip him naked and throw him into the dumpster. Not helped at all by Bob, who's in the background laughing, because he doesn't want to catch hell from Cheryl. From appearances, they at least leave him with his socks. That was very courteous of them. This is when Al arrives at the 7-minute and 25-second mark. He's wearing a pair of crazy red glasses, a silver jacket with a red shirt, and I'm kind of jealous of this outfit. Sam attempts to get out of the garbage can while covering up with a cardboard box. Eventually, Jill follows a little trail of clothes which leads to Cam. When she notices him trying to climb out of the dumpster, which causes Sam to fall backwards into it after making some progress. Jill asks him, "Are you naked?" And Al replies, "Do the initials BA mean anything to you?" Actually, Al, no, they don't. And I have little hope for being able to actually find out what in the world Al is talking about. So, let's move on. Sam replies to Cheryl's question, or rather Jill's, that he's sort of naked. Exactly, he still has his socks. And Jill says that the Impalas are such juveniles, clearly projecting their insecurity and their unconscious fear onto Sam. I wonder where I've heard that before. She ends up asking if he got pantsed because of her. And whoa. This is well beyond pants. When you get pantsed, you lose your pants. You don't get stripped completely naked and thrown into a garbage can. So this is not the definition of being pants. But anyway, Sam sort of gives this funny gesture to indicate that perhaps he was indeed pantsed because of her. And she runs off all excited. But not before Sam calls after her to give him his clothes so that he could perhaps not have to get out of that garbage can naked. Al makes a comment, young love. Nothing like it. And Sam asks, how would you know? Well, I mean, he did go into the cloakroom with Susie in the 4th grade, so of course Al would know. Before Sam dives back into the garbage can to get change. And we have this really weird shot of Al that makes it look like he's checking Sam out as he gets dressed. It's just really weird. After getting dressed and going back to his car, a waitress is already delivering his food. And Sam asks, "What's this?" And it turns out this is Cam's usual. Sam asks Al what year it is, and Al responds, 1961. And Sam is less than enthused, saying that this is the tail end of the most immature decade ever. I guess he means the 1950s, because otherwise this is the beginning of the most immature decade ever. He goes on a rant about what the 1960s were like, having the girls get their panties raided. The discussion continues, and eventually Sam looks into the mirror and says, "Maybe I'm here to clear up this guy's complexion. He seems ready to die of acne." Well, you know, Sam, I highly doubt that you were Mr. Popularity back in the day. Though I guess you played basketball for the team, so you couldn't have been that unpopular, but still. Al shrugs off the suggestion that he's there for Cam, and instead reveals that he's there for Cheryl, to keep Cheryl from marrying Bob. And Sam seems surprised by that. He says that they seem like the perfect couple. But Al points out that perfect couple eventually grows up. Not to mention, the more we go on, the less perfect they seem. And we've already seen a little crack in that already in this episode. But it seems like Cheryl has taken an awful lot of unlucky falls. This seems to click something in Sam's Swiss cheese memory as he remembers his sister Kate, who also had an abusive husband. Something he says he should have known, because he was her big brother. And this is actually the first time that we hear about Kate. It won't be the last, and eventually we actually get to meet her. Al points out that it wasn't his fault, and Sam says, maybe. But if he can't prevent Cheryl from marrying Bob, it will be. I happen to really like Scott Bakula's delivery of that line. Not only does this set up the stakes for the rest of the episode, but also gives Sam a personal reason to be invested. Sam arrives home and encounters his father. He gets punched in his left arm, kicking off a gag of Sam constantly being punched in his left arm, which actually subtly started a couple of scenes earlier when Jason Priestley gently punched him in that very arm. Cam's dad is played by Richard McGonigal. He's appeared in more than a few things, such as 500 Days of Summer, Rules of Engagement with Samuel L. Jackson, and a couple of Star Trek Voyager episodes as Reg Barclay's boss. I absolutely adore his performance in this episode. He's not in it very much. In fact, this scene is probably the one where he's the most highlighted. But it just fits the overall tone of the acting in this episode. His father eventually reveals that his mom wants to talk to him, and that she's on the warpath. Uh-oh. Sam makes his way into the kitchen, where his mom is wearing this crazy tinfoil. I don't even know what she's wearing. Probably something to dry her hair, or I don't even know what that is. But anyway, she wants to chastise him for an old Playboy magazine that the Help found. Well, old from Sam's perspective, but new as far as anybody else in this era is concerned. And Scott Bakula has this great mixture of reactions where he's trying to appear chastised while seemingly amused at the same time. After his mom finishes yelling at him, and she gets a kiss, Sam exits the scene, where she stumbles upon Cheryl in her room, painting her toes. Cheryl, amused, tells him to get in there, you little heartbreaker, because she, once again, has news for him. Cheryl proceeds to basically just outright tell Sam that Jill has a crush on him. Yeah, that's well beyond a hint. Sam reacts by basically saying, Jill? She's kind of young, isn't she? And that's certainly true from Sam's perspective. But she is not anywhere close to too young for Cam, only a year younger, which is something that Cheryl ends up calling him on. Sam ends up taking an early crack at trying to get her to leave Bob, and only manages in succeeding to upset Cheryl. Now, what's interesting here is this is not a clear-cut mission. This is not win a boxing match for a group of nuns so they can get their chapel. Nor is it prevent Miss Melanie from getting hit by a train. Heck, it's not even plug a hairdryer into a socket on a college campus somewhere while trying to make love to somebody in the Godfather's attic and hope he doesn't shoot you. Sam's mission here is to prevent Bob from marrying Cheryl. Now, I'm sure there's some people who will listen to this video who have known people in abusive relationships. You might even be someone who was in an abusive relationship yourself. And I'm sure you've tried to convince those people to leave their significant other and been frustrated when they wouldn't. That's the mission that Sam has been assigned here. And there's no clear-cut way to go about that. His approach here doesn't work, but I'd be hard-pressed to recommend a better one. We cut to a scene with Jill and Sam. They're working on a car, and Sam has absolutely no idea what he's doing. Their dynamic here is kind of interesting because Sam is acting like an older mentor, which is essentially what he is, but not what Cam is. Cam is much closer to her age. And he basically uses psychology to trick her into doing the job that Sam couldn't possibly do. Sam goes back into the house to find Al, who's basically being his lecherous self, having spied on Cheryl, trying on different types of lingerie. Why this seems to surprise Sam is beyond me. This seems like pretty typical behavior from Al for me. And that's the only other reason that Al is here. Nothing else. Not here to provide information at all. Just here to spy. Sam ends up getting admonished by his mother for coming into the house greasy, and she soon takes off. Cheryl comes running out of some room, seemingly upset, wearing a wedding dress. She runs out into the lawn, but her mom is gone. Sam asks her what's going on, because Cheryl is clearly upset. Apparently, her mom wanted her to wear her wedding dress, and Bob made a very big deal about her wearing his mom's wedding dress. And Sam asks, well, what do you want to do? And Cheryl says that she doesn't care. She's just tired of everybody telling her what to do, and she can't wait for this whole thing to be over. She's getting flustered because she can't get the dress off, and Sam offers to help. Sam starts undoing the back when he notices 2 bruises, which he comments upon. And Sam, very, very disturbed, asks, how did you get these bruises on your neck? She claims she fell, which is the classic abusive victim excuse. Sam just ends up directly accusing her. Did Bob do this? She denies it. Of course she does. Sam continues to press, and she tells him to drop it, which of course Sam can't, because he's her brother. We hear Bob drive up with his obnoxious beeping sounds, causing Cheryl to run back into the house, because it's bad luck for the groom to see the bride in the wedding dress. Bob tries to follow, but Sam stops him with a fist. It's not quite a punch, but it's a rather forceful push backwards, and it seems to amuse Bob, asking, what the hell is this? Sam notes the flowers and asks, are you trying to make up for the bruise? Before taking a swipe at the flowers. Bob asks, what are you talking about? And Sam says, the bruise on Cheryl's neck. He says, it's the kind of bruise that happens when you do this, and he grabs onto Bob's neck, eventually forcing Bob to push him off of him. We think this might go further, but it doesn't. Bob just takes a breath and starts to walk away. He says, tell Cheryl I'll pick her up at 6, and he flings the flowers at Sam. And they are all going to the rehearsal dinner. Cut to the rehearsal dinner. We see that Sam is actually a groomsman in this wedding, probably at Cheryl's insistence. Sam makes some kind of reaction, which Pencil, Jason Priestley's character, notices and gives him a shot to the arm. The same arm that's already been punched multiple times at this juncture. Bob's father ends up coming into the scene, apparently being late, and acting all kinds of obnoxious. He's played by Robert Costanzo, and he has 288 acting credits to his name, including Total Recall, Die Hard 2, City Slickers, and Saturday Night Live. He's still piling on the credits, too, having recently appeared in a mob drama called El Coyote. Basically, Bob's father is a classless buffoon. And Sam, while standing next to his sister, makes the comment, right just literally seconds after I did. He says, like father, like son, which earns him a punch in the arm from Cheryl, the same one he's been getting punched in all episode long. Sam politely asks her to punch him somewhere else, so she goes for the stomach. I'm sure that's much better. At the rehearsal dinner, Sam is stuck sitting at the children's table and ends up getting punched in the arm by a little girl. Meanwhile, Bob's father gives a toast, which is full of classless jokes that seem to impress the women none at all. Bob himself is the next to give a speech and ends up presenting Cheryl with a gift, a color TV. Sam decides to give a speech, and it's a lovely speech dedicated to his sister Cheryl. And then he makes a joke at the end, given that the fact that there will probably be no TVs allowed in Tonga, which is where Cheryl and Bob are supposed to be going, though Sam is extremely skeptical that Bob is ever going to go there. He will be able to watch the next show in color. Al appears, and Sam, who really should know better, starts talking to Al, which draws the attention of Jason Priestley, who ends up spooning food at him. And that's as good enough as an excuse as any to go to the bathroom. Sam reports to Al that it's starting already, that the abuse is already going on right now. Not sometime in the distant future, but right now. And he's pretty unconvinced that he can get Cheryl to listen to him. And he looks in the mirror and asks, "Would you listen to me?" A kid comes out of one of the stalls, dressed in a tuxedo. And the kid asks, "Who are you talking to?" And Sam claims to be rehearsing a play, which starts a dance-a-thon, which is entirely superfluous, but kind of fun. And as it turns out, this is Michael Jackson as a kid, and Sam has introduced the moonwalk. This is what's known as a kiss with history, which I have discussed in the past. Bob and his father come into the bathroom, and Sam hides in one of the stalls. And my God, is Kevin Spiritus really bad in this scene. It almost sounds like ADR, like they dubbed over his voice, and it's badly done. But every line he speaks in the scene is totally 100% unconvincing. He's not great in this episode, but this is by far the worst scene for his performance in this episode. The gist of the scene is that he has no intention of going to the Peace Corps. He's going to take a job with his father. His father's going to buy a house, so on and so forth. His father lets slip that his wife wanted to go to college, but he got her pregnant to prevent that from happening. Couple of Class A acts, these guys. Sam goes to Cheryl in a scene that we do not see, but Cheryl confronts Bob. And Bob, of course, denies everything. And Cheryl ends up taking Bob's side. And Al comes up with a suggestion, which he tells Sam to tell him to race for pinks, which Sam immediately parrots, causing all the friends in the scene to laugh, except Cheryl doesn't laugh at all. Bob, laughing, accepts the challenge, and Sam walks away to ask Al, "Why are we doing this?" And Al tells him he's been up against hotshots like Bob before. As long as they're in control, you can't shake them. But if he loses to a hunk of junk like the Mambo Mobile, he'll lose it and show his true colors. Cheryl will finally see the monster, though, given the fact that we already have bruises on Cheryl has already seen the monster, but it wasn't enough to convince her to leave him. But maybe having the monster come out towards your brother will be enough for you to finally see what you need to see. That's my take on the situation, not Al's. But Sam agrees with Al. He thinks he's right. Just one problem. Bob has the fastest car on the block. And Al points out, what they don't have is nitrous oxide. During the race, you shoot up some nitrous oxide, and it'll give the car a boost. Great, Sam thinks. The only problem is, if you shoot in too much, you blow up and die. We have a quick scene of Jill with Sam installing the nitrous oxide. But there turns out to be a little bit of a leak which causes Sam and Jill to start laughing hysterically. Charming little scene. Cut to the Mambo-mobile showing up for the race. Jason Priestley approaches Sam and says he didn't think that he would have the Canaches to show. He asks for Sam's pink, and Sam gives it to him. Jill ends up asking, "Where's Bob's pink?" And he shows it to her. Sam makes Jill get out of the car because, there's a slight possibility that this car is going to explode. Meanwhile, looking over at Bob and Cheryl, Sam wants Cheryl out of the car and ends up asking, "Are you chicken to race alone?" The challenge is sufficient in causing Bob to kick Cheryl out of the car. The race begins. Sam is losing. Sam reaches for the green button, but Al stops him. He says, "Not yet. You'll peak too soon." And Sam is all excited that Al is there. They drive a little longer, and then Al tells him to push the button, which causes Sam to speed past a shocked Bob. Back at the finish line, Cheryl is amused and clapping. Jill is jumping around all excited. In the car, Al asks him, "Wasn't that a kick in the butt?" And that's actually a pretty regular catchphrase for Al that I haven't commented upon before. He's been using it since the pilot episode. Sam gets out of the car to celebrate his victory. Meanwhile, a while back, Bob is still driving, and Sam must have been lapped him by a mile because he seems to be driving way too fast not to have already caught up with them. He seems to contemplate slowing down, but then he speeds up and aims for Sam Beckett. Sam Beckett leaps out of the way as he hears the screams of the onlookers, specifically his sister Cheryl. Bob crashes into a wall, gets out of the car, and says, "You want this car? You can have it." And he throws the keys at Cam. Cheryl, meanwhile, is pretty upset. She's basically like, "You tried to kill my little brother." And his response is, "Well, I didn't I?" That's a fantastic defense there. This is enough to convince Cheryl to throw away her ring and to tell Cam, "Let's go home." Bob does not react kindly to this. He goes after Cheryl, but Sam leaps over the hood of his car and punches Bob out. Bob, on his knees and bleeding, expects some help from his friends. He expects them to come to his defense, but they all just stare at him. And Jason Priestley says that was definitely an uncool move, and he flicks his cigarette at him. And that's how Bob lost all of his friends. They all walk away. Cheryl ends up getting into the Mambo-mobile. And just before Sam and Jill get in the car, Sam whispers into something into Jill's ears. Jill holds up Bob's pink, and then with a flick of her wrist, drops it on the ground. Because this race was not about winning Bob's car. I absolutely love this little flourish of her flicking her wrists and the pink falling to the ground. I can't really explain why I loved it. Kind of like at points in this episode, I can't really explain why I love it so much, but it's just the style of it. We cut to the bus yard. Cheryl is about to depart for the Peace Corps. Sam asks her if she's still scared, and she says yes, but she will get over it. My little brother guaranteed it. She tells him he saved her life. And Sam replies, "No, you did that yourself." And they embrace. And just before she departs, she tells him that she has a gift for him in the courtyard. We cut to Sam in the courtyard, and music is playing, though I don't know from where. He ends up encountering Al, and they sing that song together. And again, I have absolutely no idea where this music is coming from. But it's an adorable little scene between them. Sam asks Al what happened to Cheryl, and apparently she made a lifetime commitment to the Peace Corps. She's in Africa right now, in the far-flung future of 1999. So, Sam is slightly curious, or not slightly, he is very curious as to why he hasn't left yet. And as it turns out, the reason Sam hasn't left yet is because of Cheryl's gift, which turns out to be Jill, all dolled up. So my question actually is, why couldn't Cam take it from here? Why did Sam need to be here for this? And from a practical standpoint, it's true. Cam would probably be better off being here at this moment. Unless we're saying, the creators or God, time, and fate, or whatever, are saying that Cam is incapable of carrying it on from here because he's too shy. Maybe that's a possibility. But from a creative standpoint, it makes dramatic sense for Sam to still be here to tie up this little loose end. Because if Sam left, we never would have seen this. Jill admits to wishing that Cam would be her first real guy friend. And Sam realizes that she hasn't even had a first kiss. Al encourages him to go ahead and do it, to give her a kiss. Now that's the other reason why Cam would be better off here, because this is slightly sketchy. I mean, the intentions are pure, this is innocent, but I'm not sure that this would play too well during the current time frame in the modern era. Sam ends up leaning in for a kiss. It's a mild peck, which Jill is not satisfied with. She goes for a deeper kiss, which seems to surprise Sam, but he just sort of goes along with it. And then he leaps. Fantastic episode all the way around. If we're looking at things objectively, if we're talking about substance, the previous episode, The Color of Truth, is probably a better episode. But the style of this episode is just so much fun. From the acting, the music, the energy, everything about it is just fun. And we even have a good dramatic hook with the whole Cheryl and Bob situation. A word about Scott Bakula in this episode. He's absolutely fantastic. This is his best performance to date. He nails the comedy aspects of the episode. He's really an underrated comedic actor, while also nailing the dramatic parts of this episode as well. He's just all in all great in this episode, as he is throughout the series. At this point, it seems like Scott Bakula has gotten comfortable with the role and has found his groove. The next time we meet to talk about Quantum Leap will be for Play It Again Seymour, the season finale of Season 1. It's one that I quite often skip on rewatches of the series. Not because it's bad, but just simply because it's not my cup of tea. But we'll see when we talk about this episode whether my estimation of this episode has gotten better over time. Next week, we're going to be going back to This Is Us for the episode Now What? The penultimate episode of Season 1 of This Is Us. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Korman Productions. You can join my Korman Productions Facebook page. You can buy something from the Korman Productions store on Zazzle. You can buy me a coffee, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Korman Productions, signing off.